Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I'll try to keep this brief. Just with the budget time that we're going through here, there's been a lot of discussion on several things. So we want to touch on one of the hot topics, and that is our level of reserves. So we're going to have some general discussion on where these come from, what the purpose is for them, and then have some policy discussion or future discussion surrounding that. So we've dubbed this Reserves 101. So we're going to talk a little bit about funds, and this was used in a previous presentation, so this is a little bit of a quick review on the types of funds and what the purpose is and what the funding sources are. So governmental funds, general fund is the one we're most familiar with. That's our largest fund operating in the city. It covers things like police, fire, all of those types of things. The primary funding source is property taxes. We have capital projects funds, and that includes capital equipment, capital infrastructure, and capital flood control. We have special revenue funds. We have a number of those: transportation, library, the NAS biota plant, which is a new one, flood control maintenance, which is relatively new, the emergency fund, Central Dakota MPO, which again is new, and then our various sales tax funds. The last one that we have is the debt service funds of the governmental funds. Then we have the enterprise funds, all of those: parking ramps, water, sewer, sanitation, cemetery, parking authority, and the airport. So again, talking about the different types of funds, different sources of revenue. Governmental funds, typically that's where the bulk of your property tax levy goes to. State aid distribution, some sales tax goes into there, particularly the portion that's designated for property tax relief. License, permits, fees, grants, fines, interest earnings are the general sources of revenues. The uses, again, public safety, library, assessor's office, legal, human resources, finance, IT, all of those administrative departments, property maintenance, and then some infrastructure and capital purchases. Enterprise funds, those are things we operate like a business: airport, sanitation, cemetery, parking, and again, those revenues come from fees that we charge related to those operations and interest earnings. The uses, that's the services that we provide that people are paying us, like the water, sewer, those types of things. So municipal budget law, this is in North Dakota Century Code, the section dealing with the municipal budgets, and we've highlighted this section in yellow here, and it tells us at the end of the fiscal year, the balance of each appropriation becomes part of the general unappropriated balance in the municipal treasury, and it goes on to have some more details. So essentially what that means is that appropriation lapses at the end of the year. There are a couple of exceptions with that. If we are engaged in a contract or we have contracted for services that haven't been fully completed yet, we can encumber that appropriation into the next year. But once that appropriation lapses at the end of the year, that money goes into the fund balance and it loses its identity for what it was originally appropriated for. So for example, if we have a line item that is appropriated for salaries at the end of the year and we don't spend all of that money at the end of the year, that appropriation lapses, that money that we did not spend becomes part of fund balance, and that's the identity that it has, is its fund balance. It's cash, and that's what we commonly refer to as reserves that are available in the future. This is a spreadsheet that was used. City Manager Stewart had a slide in his presentation that highlighted some of the reserves in the various funds and the different components that came with that. And we had a request, asking for the data that was underlying that slide. And then the further request is to do a forecast of where we might end up at the end of 2024 and even projecting into 2025. So this was a bit of a stab at coming up with a number with that. There are a lot of moving pieces that come into play with this. How much of what's appropriated will we actually spend, what's going to be on the revenue side of things, as well as timing issues sometimes come into play too. The one thing I wanted to highlight that goes along with that fund balance that we carry, this is an excerpt from our CIP, and it's actually longer than this. This was just the part I could fit onto the slide. But this is for the 5-year period, and the total in that 5-year period for the CIP is just over 612,000, almost 613 million dollars. Of that, we were funding about $370 million with state and federal dollars. So the balance of that comes from some other source. And I've highlighted in yellow some of the ones that are going to be included here in the CIP, sales tax dollars. And I'll caveat this, that flood control is a big number in this CIP. And of course, we have sales tax dollars that are dedicated to paying for flood control and things like NAWS. So we would anticipate that those would be a big number. One of the things at the very bottom there, the local revenue bonds is $100 million. And that's a number that we're saying that we don't have another funding source, so we're going to go out and bond to support these projects. And the reason we highlighted that, of course, $35 million from other, is this is where some of that reserve balance comes into play when we're looking at future projects and how we're going to fund that. We know with this large flood control project that we are going to have to finance that to complete the project. So kind of like when you're buying a house, you know, it's a big ticket purchase. We don't go and buy the camper and the boat and the four-wheeler, everything else when we know we're going to buy the house and have to borrow money to do that. So that's where the balancing act starts, that we know we have these big ticket items that we will have to finance for 30 or 40 years. How can we accomplish these other projects that we also need in the meantime without overextending ourselves somewhere? So that's where we start to look into the future a little bit and balance what we have in reserves with what we know we have coming in the future. And of course, that's a sliding scale on both ends of that picture. We have to manage our budgets and the revenue picture on this side to make sure that we are as efficient as we can be. But also when we're looking into the future, there are a lot of things that come up that we aren't able to predict or forecast very accurately. So it's a balancing act, and how much is enough in reserves to have in case those things happen, and how much is too much, and how much is not enough. So this just cites some of the sources that we have that we use to put this information together. These are available on the city's finance webpage. And again, this was meant to be just a quick little snippet to get conversations started and to show you some of the background information that we use when we're doing some of these things. And I'll certainly answer any questions that you might have.
Mike.
Thanks, Dave. This is helpful. You know, I had some of the requests that you put together, and I appreciate that very much. So just to be clear on a couple things. So when we've got the numbers that you're showing right now, which shows $100 million in potential bonding, just looking forward, it's a broad strokes look right now. As we make decisions on things like buying property by Public Works, or spending an extra $2 million on a $1 million project for the railway quiet zone, or working with the Broadway Circle project for $1.4 million out of reserves, that's all working towards that number. It's hurting us, correct?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Blessum, yeah, that is part of the equation. It's a balancing act. It's literally the balance sheet. Whatever we take out of the piggy bank today is not available for a future project. Yeah.
Right. So just if I can continue, Mr. Mayor. So in decisions over the last couple months, and actually even the ones just since I've been on the council now for 6 weeks, we've already got well over $3 million that we've made in decisions that's making that bonding picture worse as we go forward. And so, Dave, I'm addressing you, but this is as much to my colleagues as anyone else. These are the types of decisions that make our future look a lot more difficult. And these are the types of property tax decisions that affect the people of our city. And so that's why I would urge my colleagues to take a look at these things as they come up, because we all understand the SIP picture looking forward. This is not an easy or a simple picture as we're going here. And we're making it more difficult for ourselves with each decision that's made. Thanks.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Dave.